Pontis Research, we're a security consulting company. We started in 1994, so we've been around a while. And we focused on identity and access management around the last 2 decades, I would say. So it's been a long journey. And we look at IAM as a journey. With all of our clients, we always talk about it as a journey. And we think of ourselves as guides because we've been down pretty much every rabbit hole you can think of. So that's what we bring to the table: experience and a long time in this space, and a lot of experience with most of the technologies we come into contact with in the IAM space, right? So that's us. And why did we pick this topic today, and what are we going to talk about, right? Typically, when you think of IAM, we talk about employees, consumers, vendors, partners, you name it. And we talk about authentication, authorization, onboarding, registration, privileged access, single sign-on. I mean, the list goes on, right? But here, we wanted to look at something slightly different, equally important, but different. We're talking about optimizing identity in the application space, in the cloud service provider space. How do you, as an organization, make sure that your application developers can put in the right level of security controls and management of identity without having to jump through hoops? And rather than talk about hypotheticals today, we are bringing you a real life story from someone who's lived the optimizing identity journey. So I'm very happy to welcome Ashok Kumar. He is a vice president at AlienVault, which is now an AT&T Cybersecurity company. And Ashok, welcome. And maybe we can start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself and about AlienVault, and then we'll dive into the story itself. Yeah.
Awesome. Can you hear me, Vinita?
Yes.
Okay. So, thank you, Vinita. Thank you for the introduction. Not only did I live through that, I actually survived through it. So I'm here to tell you that story about what we did, lessons learned, survive, and really love to share our experiences with your audience, right? So a little bit about me. I'm Ashok Kumar, live in beautiful Austin, Texas. Been here for 16 years. I wouldn't move anywhere else. So absolutely love it here. I've got a beautiful family here. My parents live close to me. Amazing, amazing city. This feels truly, truly home. So I work at, you might have heard of us, this little company called AT&T. We just happen to be everywhere. AT&T Business is we focuses on providing business solutions to customers, on top of mobility, connectivity, fiber, and so on. So we are what we do here is connectivity plus. So a couple of years ago, 2018, AT&T acquired this company called AlienVault, and AlienVault was a niche provider in the cybersecurity space, focused on what some of you might have heard of as it's called a SIM, security incident and event management. So we were a SaaS-based SIM product that AT&T acquired, and then we became AT&T Cybersecurity, along with a couple of other facets added to it, right? So that's who we are. That's our legacy. So I run engineering and operations for all of the AlienVault application streams, the products and services that we support. I'm responsible for service delivery, service support, and then operations, for them. Right? So that is a little bit about me. So we are an MXDR-based service delivery organization. What is MXDR? If you are working in a business, you own a business, you need cybersecurity. That's obvious, right? I mean, the digital transformation we've kind of been through the last 2 years, you need us. You need cybersecurity solutions. You need to protect the network, the application, the user, the data, and the endpoint. So you need all of this. MXDR is basically our managed version of extended detection and response. That's a new term within cyber. XDR basically is an all-inclusive term for all of these different things I talked about. And MXDR is the managed version of it. So cybersecurity is hard. If we can manage it for you, we love to do it. So that's kind of what we do. We have many, many, many customers. All of them use our SaaS product. some directly, some through the managed portfolio. We provide all kinds of solutions: SD-WAN, 5G, connectivity, edge, IoT, cybersecurity, whole host of integrated solutions. And then we not only have our solutions, we work with the best in breed partners around the world. So the advantage of being AT&T is every partner would love to come work with us. So we have the best in breed cybersecurity partners in our portfolio that we offer to our customers. So it's a little bit about me and where my company.
So like any story, right? Let's begin at the beginning. This is 2018 that Ashok talked about. And tell us a little bit about where you were at that time, some of the challenges you had, and then from there we'll go into some of the drivers that made you think about modernization. Yeah. So give us a sort of a bird's eye view of what you had.
All right. So we started off. Our legacy is that of an appliance company, right? So in the old days, in the early 2010s, about a decade ago, AlienVault really was an appliance company. So essentially, what that meant is, we burn the software image on a big rack and we ship it to you, and you install it in your data center, and then you run that, you manage it, you operate it, and we remotely support it. That was the pedigree. Clearly, we had to change, and sometime in 2015, 16, we made the shift to move to the cloud. So we moved to the cloud. We obviously, as a small company, like many of our panel participants here, we don't have the resources to stop what we're doing, rewrite everything to be cloud native, and then restart life as we know. We have too many customers to support, and obviously that is not an impractical way of thinking about it. So we did what everybody else would do in our situation. We lifted and shifted. We lifted the appliance and we shifted into the cloud. Obviously it worked well. We're super happy. So the very first figure you see here is kind of what this application looked like. So we have we have what we call a control node, which is basically our backend. The end user accesses the backend through a really nice user interface. And then that backend is all inclusive, self-contained, single-tenanted, where every enterprise customer has their own instance, which is great because you have complete isolation. There's no noisy neighbor. There's no cross-pollination. You have your own instance. Life is good, right? But there was one little problem. As we were kind of aspiring to grow, we started realizing challenges. You might have heard of this little thing called microservice. So when our aspirations were to start using multi-tenant microservices, this model clearly did not work for us. So that was the challenge where we started. You may cover some of these other points here, Vinita? Okay. So the challenges not only the previous slide, please. So the issues for us was not just the fact that we had a single tenanted service, and then we had to have that coexist with the microservice world. If you could go back to the previous slide, I think it's different than that.
Yeah.
So the microservice world, the issue became such that how do we account for newer breeds of services, right? For example, the second part of the diagram has something called the USM Central. So our SIM, as we know it, is USM Anywhere. That's the main product. And then there is a companion product that goes with the main product called Central. And the only job of that is to manage multiple instances. So if you're a managed security solutions provider, or MSSP, as we call them, or if you're a huge enterprise and you're managing, 25 instances in 25 geographies, whatever that use case may be, you want a way to manage multiple, security SIMs in a cloud environment. So this is kind of where we started. And then some of the challenges, where we really instantly hit were, became tribal knowledge. The people that built the appliance are not the same people that are around to redo, as part of this transformation journey. We use many proprietary APIs. A lot of the development was done overseas, and things were just made to work. In a small company, you just your idea is to just get something to work. Some of those standards were a little out of date, and then scalability was clearly a bit of a challenge for us, right? We wanted to scale to tens of thousands of enterprise customers. That was really difficult to do, in the original model where we started. Okay, next slide.
So
we
tell us, okay, one sec, Ashok. See, what Ashok's talking about is something we see with a lot of our clients, right? They have applications, they started out, they've got a path for the applications, they know what they want to do, but then identity becomes a bit of a challenge. And the only people who know how it's been built into the system are the people that built the application. So it's tribal. There aren't any standards because when it started, it was sort of glue and fix and make it work however it works. And so this is where all of the drivers come into play. And so Ashok, tell us a little bit about the drivers for you guys as you went to talk, because when you go to management and you say, we're going to revamp the way we do something, they're going to need business drivers.
That's right.
And so that's where this becomes really critical, because I think some of the things you ran into, tell us a little bit about how you justified this, really, this move.
Right. So clearly, we quickly realized that, in order for our business to evolve, to much bigger sizes and bigger heights, we had to, rethink some of the fundamentals. And the most fundamental thing here is identity. So identity was identified as the most fundamental thing that we need to go and fix in order for us to accelerate our pace, have our solution be more pervasive, and then scale 10x, right? So one of the things we wanted to do was, there were so many different services that AT&T Cybersecurity offers. The SIM is one big component, but it's not the only component. So there's a lot of these services, and how do we kind of bring these services together? Like if you sign up for Office 365 and you have Word, and Excel is a different service, you want to be able to snap in and out of these experiences without much, I have to re-log into Excel in a different credential. That doesn't work, right? You want shared data, shared experiences, shared identity, shared role-based access control, things like that. So the same constructs hold true for enterprise applications also. We want synergy within these different applications. So we want one identity across the portfolio. That was the very first goal. The second was to have fine-grained access controls. Now, if you are selling a product and a service, and you have service providers, MSSPs, as we call it, managed security service providers, you want them, they are operating it for you. You want to be able to provide as much fine-grained control as you can possibly give somebody. It's not just, here are 3 roles, deal with it, right? So we want to be able to, have demarcation between, who can do what, and have a lot of those fine-grained accesses, pushed down into our customer base. We want standards-based solutions, right? Identity has evolved a lot over the last 10 years. And clearly for us, we wanted to be able to plug into these new standards, whether it's single sign-on, or whether it's using OpenID Connect, or using SAML for exchanging information between 2 enterprise applications, or using things like SRP for securely transferring passwords. We wanted the best in it. We are a cybersecurity company. We have to be standards-based, and we have to be, our products have to be top-notch security. So that was a huge deal for standards-based, and security is the best. It's okay to even over-engineer it for security, but not go down on it. Dynamic single sign-on access. I want to be able to sign on anywhere in the product and have the same experience across the portfolio. So being able to take the single sign-on and then make it work. Enhanced auditability and security. We sell to SLED, state, local, education, and so on. Right? We are a FedRAMP accredited solution, so we sell to the federal government. So auditability, compliance, those things are of vital importance to us. Our customers trust our solution for SOC 2, HIPAA, PCI compliance. So we need to exceed those standards. So it is very, very important for us that our identity solution, the most fundamental solution that we have, the building block, exceeds all these standards. So these were our drivers.
And I think the thing you touched upon, which is really important from what I'm hearing you say, and which we see everywhere, is the unification of identity. Because what happens is, and we're a managed provider as well. We offer services to some of our clients. The biggest issue is if people have to have multiple logins, multiple identities, go across the different platforms, it just makes it harder. So if you make it harder, what are they going to do? They're going to sort of take shortcuts. So it's really important to unify identity across your portfolio, like you said. And then, of course, dynamic single sign-on is a given, because unless you have that, people are going to try and take shortcuts.
That's right.
So, you know, we see this across the board, and I'm sure every one of you on this call has been there and done this and wondered how to clean this up. So now let's move to what we think is where you are today. And Ashok, tell us what you have today so we can then talk about why this has, you know, been beneficial.
So what we have here is a gross simplification of, you know, where we've arrived as a business when it comes to, you know, our maturity of using identity. So we've got single tenanted instances that we really like because, you know, it gives us gives our customers dedicated platforms where, you know, there is no commingling of data. There is, you know, there is the best of using, you know, dedicated resources works best. At the same time, we have multi-tenanted services where we really can't afford to have a service for every customer. There are so many shared services we want to take advantage of. So that is now possible because of this identity transformation. Why is that? Simply because in the old model, we had, it was a classic client server architecture. So you have the server is responsible, which in our case was a big control node, which is a big instance that is responsible for identity, for UI, for database, for the business logic, and, you know, persistence. All the stuff is stuffed into one box, right? So when we start breaking all that into distributed, decomposed microservices, which are shared by definition, they're all multi-tenanted. They need a way to authenticate. We can't just ignore authentication for microservices. So how are we going to authenticate microservices? That all has to go through a centralized identity layer. So we invested in identity as a service, and we've been at this for about 2 years now. Invested in creating identity as a top level service. You know, created an API around a cloud provider. We use AWS exclusively, extensively rather. So we use a API on top of AWS, and that now provides identity services for microservices, as well as our legacy you know, control nodes, as well as, you know, authenticating things like, you know, our public API. You know, we put a lot of investment in public API. We've done a lot of investment in partner exchanges. We put significant double down investments in, you know, omni-channel way of, you know, accessing our services, right? So all of them need a way to authenticate and authorize, and they cannot depend on a central point, a central control node, and they cannot depend. Authentication cannot happen at an individual user level. It has to happen in a centralized way. So having centralized identity as a service, which basically means we have an amazing API on top of a existing cloud provider, right? That through which we basically do our access controls and all these other things. That has been a pivotal shift for us, and that has enabled us to have both multi-tenanted services and single-tenanted services and omni-channel access to our product suite. That has been a huge change for us.
So I have a quick question. You threw a lot of terms out there, right? You talked of commingling of data. Can you explain what you meant by commingling? Just because I know we have different level sets around what we think of when we say commingling.
Yeah, so when we think of a shared architecture, right, there is sharing happening at some level. Any cloud architecture, you're sharing something. You're sharing either a slice of the network, or you're sharing a compute instance, or you're sharing a storage tenant or something. In our case, you know, if you build purely as a shared infrastructure, like, you know, like some low cost services, like, you know, if you're hosting a WordPress site, everything is shared. There's nothing dedicated. Like your data resides with somebody else's data in the exact same DBMS, and one wrong permission can cause issues, right? So we cannot take such kinds of chances when it comes to cybersecurity, simply because, you know, we hold the keys to, you know, somebody else's vulnerabilities. So we really have to be extra cautious that we don't even accidentally, or there's no chance that somebody else can, you know, get access to your vulnerability. Another customer can get access, and so on. So there is a nice demarcation here when it comes to the data tier of it. But when it comes to services, we're talking about stateless services that do a very specific iota of task. Take this user, authenticate him, or take this microservice that does basically pushes this bunch of data from X to Y, or authenticates something from here to there, or cleanses something from and then puts it back, or verifies something. Those there's no reason why we need to make them single tenanted. They can be shared because they are stateless. They look at transaction to transaction to transaction. So we wanted these two paradigms to coexist. And that is where the biggest challenge was when we started this identity journey. And now having having centralized identity takes the responsibility away from per user level identity access to a centralized access. Now, so we can sort of live the best of both worlds. We can have dedicated resources when we need them. We have shared services, when it's more efficient to have them. So that's what it's about.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you see as the benefits, and then I wanted to throw some stuff we've been seeing as well, but you go first.
Okay, so again, like I said, it's a huge investment for anybody listening that is part of an IT shop, that manages an IT shop. If you're spending 2 years on a project, the ROI has to be massive, right? So for us also, the expectations were huge. And then really what we're getting out of this is invaluable. So fundamentally, we're getting IAM governance with policy-based orchestration of access management. Essentially, what that means is that rather than having localized identity that is not built to a standard, where you're not able to really truly enforce policy-based access control across the board, you got to do it for 10,000 customers individually. Now we have a centralized way using established IAM practices that we have governance along with policy management that we can apply at the fleet level or individual level or targeted levels or any levels. We have the flexibility to basically, apply policy where we see it. And we also have a solid governance play because we're using standards-based authentications, we're using standards, we're using building on top of a cloud provider. So we are limiting, identity is a commodity, right? There's no need for us to reinvent the wheel, but we are sort of not putting ourselves in a position where we can make some, serious architectural mistakes because we're building on top of other established, services. So that is what that first one means. Federation, optimized federation. So we have a model where we have the USM central customers, which is our panoramic view. So if I'm managing, if I'm a service provider, if I'm a managed solutions provider, and I'm managing 10 different SIMs for 10 customers, I want to be able to federate this very easily, right? If I add a new customer tomorrow, we want to spin that customer up in a matter of, an hour maybe. And then the identity for that has to be very dynamic. None of this has to be, okay, I need to take down this system. I need to configure some access here in this database, some manually go, none of that stuff. This happens dynamically and we can make changes on the fly. We can really change the way who gets access to what in what context. It's very context-based. That is what the optimized federation really means. It's modern because we support microservices. The world is all microservices now. There is nobody that's not using containers or microservices. That's where everybody is going, right? So without an identity solution like this, there's no way we could have gone to microservices unless we break some other design patterns or do something silly, like a band-aid solution, right? We want scalable solutions that we can support, we can grow, that are modern. So having that identity platform enables us to be a modern player with modern in a modern world, right? Everything is standards-based. Yeah, this time the first time go around, it was just made to work. Somehow make it work. Identity is not a fun topic at all, right? It's a really boring subject. I'm sorry, but it's one of those things that you don't really want. Nobody dreams about identity. Oh, I want to make this identity. It's one of the most. It's like paying your taxes. It's the most boring thing, and it's all behind the scenes. Like all the work you've done, nobody's going to see it. They're only going to complain when it doesn't work, right? So they take you for granted. You're a utility, just like your water supply. Like if you're in Texas, when you get those boil water notices, oh, there's actually a Texas Environmental Commission on water quality. I never knew about it. So identity is an invisible service provider. And if it's not standards based, and if it's not built to something very specific, then we have taken something that's a commodity and we've given it like a star status. We've basically made it into a pet not a cattle, if you know what that analogy means, right? So identity needs to be cattle. It has to be. It's a service, and it's not something we want to invest a whole bunch of time in. So make it standards based. So we can do the application development in-house. We can bring in somebody from the outside tomorrow, or outsource some maintenance things for identity. And there's so many different possibilities for making it standards based instead of trying to do something different. And then granularity is super important for us. We need to know exactly who's accessing what, things like that. We need to be able to have fine-grained access control. You can see it, you can't change it. In this context or a different context, you can do something different. So those were the things that we really wanted to do, because somebody else is now operating the software in a managed service world, right? So they needed a lot of customization, a lot of flexibility, and this identity solution gives us that flexibility.
So one question, Ashok, around this. What are the how do you know, or how do you measure your success here? Do you have like KPIs? Do you do like a periodic check to see that whatever model you have in place is working and whatever you built is successful? What is your metric?
Yeah, it's a good question, Vinita. So our metric is really not having to manage individual identities, for individual customers at all. Moving away from that model is number one. Second is, there is a performance aspect to it that you've not talked about here. So we expect now when we move to a microservice world, like if you talk about a regular use case, like I'm logging into Facebook, okay, there are 5 million people concurrently logging into Facebook. Okay, Facebook can go and create a platform that can support, 2x that. Okay, I can support 10 million concurrent logins to something. Now, once you start putting it on devices, on IoT, that number goes up exponentially. And the same thing is happening with cybersecurity. As cybersecurity evolves from a user like you or me getting into it and looking at a console to an IoT provider that's sending us data or consuming data, the number of identity requests just goes up exponentially. And I'm talking like 10x to 100x, right? So being able to factor in those kinds of performance, support those kinds of performance numbers was another goal. It was a pretty big goal for us. And really the goal, the overall overarching goal for this is get rid of our in-house identity solution, completely move over to this cloud-based solution. And then where it's redundant, where, it's fault tolerant, because identity goes down, it's an outage. So redundant, fault tolerant, and then, and it's very transparent to customers. Those were like some top level goals. We don't have a KPI per se to measure some of these goals, but the customer should barely even notice that something has happened in the background, right? So things like that, that's what we were trying to hit.
And that's a very good point, because we've managed a lot of identity solutions for customers. And when they work and when nothing goes wrong, they somehow think it's not a big deal. Because the more, it's only when people see fires that they think, okay, there is an issue. And it's unfortunate, but like you just said, that identity is one of those things, it works and everybody's happy and nobody thinks about it, or it doesn't work and it's like, everyone's running around like headless chickens. And so the measurement of metrics becomes very critical here, because otherwise people just take it for granted. So it's something to, I think about, and this is me with my consulting hat on, but something to think about where you can routinely measure the progress of what you have done and see baseline where you were, what your requirements were, and whether it's improved or done badly, so you can go back and review it. Something to definitely think about as you take this further.
Right, that's right. So
okay. What I wanted to so this was really the meat and potatoes of this whole story that Ashok told us. From that, what we did was we sat down and we put together some takeaways that apply no matter where you are, what you do. And so can you walk us through your perspective on these takeaways, please, Ashok, and then I'll add some of what I think about it as well.
Awesome. So these are all lessons we learned firsthand, lessons I learned firsthand these are all, some of these are actually battle scars. So, take it for what it's worth, but definitely think about this if you're wherever you are in your identity journey. The very, very first thing is identity is foundational and there are no shortcuts. So what I mean by that is, like I said, identity is a really boring thing. I don't want to work on identity. I have 3 teams working on identity. I'd rather they work on a feature, right? And that will build some more revenue or something. But if I ignore the foundational pieces, how am I going to build another story on top of another story on top of another story? If identity is not rock solid, if there are gaps in it, it can open me to compliance issues, security issues. It can open me up to developmental issues, meaning it's difficult to develop solutions if I haven't thought through this completely. If I haven't thought through the scale of this completely, then again, it's something that there's no compromise, right? So you cannot compromise on identity, things that are foundational, fundamental. So please don't ignore it. The second part of it is around security, right? So identity is not just a feature. Identity is not a feature. Far from it, right? Identity is as much intrinsic to your application as like I would say, how a life support function is to a human being, like your breath or whatnot, right? There is no application without identity, and there is no identity if you haven't thought through security. So security is probably as paramountly important as the ability for somebody to log in. What I mean by security is that, what tools, what standards are you building into? Where is your password being encrypted? How are you handling, basically, how's your handshake happening? Where is your SSL termination happening? Do you really understand where the elements of this, where can somebody have compromise you? Cross-site scripting or whatever that compromise might be. Have you thought through all of these attack vectors where security could be a weak point? So that is super important. You cannot, downplay that. The third one, again, we learned this the hard way, was build to a standard. No, don't just build something to work, build it to a standard. Building it to a standard might seem a little longer because you're going a little about in circles, but trust me, when it comes time to upgrade your standard, build to a different standard, or like in case if there's a vulnerability with a certain version of a package you've got and you want to upgrade it, as long as things are to a standard, your life is going to be so much more easier because you and the rest of the world who built the standard are in the same boat, and you can share those experiences, and it's much easier to sort of take something and move faster. So you might feel like you're going more slow by building to a standard, but the reality is that you're going to accelerate, your journey at some point in the future. So always build to a standard. The next one is identity is hard. Identity is not easy. I mean, it's not like if user equals this, password equals this, then allow access, if not deny access. That's the simpleton's view of looking at identity. Identity is such a fundamental foundational element here. It's built into every facet. If you're accessing a network, there's identity. Every time your computer talks to your Wi-Fi router, and it's negotiating identity, through that, right? Now it's not just human beings. Like I said, IoT, I mean, that's kind of the next wave. Like there are so many devices and gadgets in your house, your fridge, not to say your phone and computer, but so many smart devices. They're all consuming identity. Everybody has an identity on the network, identity on, in your the service catalog and things like that, right? So there is a lot of complexity when it comes to building enterprise applications, and if you can abstract that complexity by just saying, here is a plug and play way, you don't have to, Mr. Developer, you don't have to worry about identity. All you're doing is you go write your application, your business logic, create the experience you want. Just build it to this, may have it talk to this SSO standard or the SAML standard, which is common, and it's super easy to test independently, and it's super easy to test it when you do an integration test. You will be able to sort of move development through its cycles by building to that standard and by abstracting that complexity. You don't want developers to understand the complexity of all this, otherwise it's never going to work. The last one is think future proof and future proof. Flexibility and scalability are important. Like I said, as you're building enterprise applications, the one thing that is so obvious is the scale, the size of devices that is not human beings that's going to be talking to your application. If not today, tomorrow, some non-human entity, some machine, some IoT device, some API is going to be wanting to talk to your application. And how are you going to basically handle those needs? How are you going to be able to dynamically provision users? How are you going to be able to dynamically audit users? How do you know that you don't have a breach here, and you don't have abnormal usage patterns? How do you know do you have machine learning capabilities? That's one of the things we've invested this in cybersecurity. We have user behavior analytics, like Vinita's logging in from California every day and logging into the IT system. Tomorrow she logs in from Russia and checks the payroll system. That's a flag, right? So how do you know that you can handle these kinds of oddities, scale, and future needs, right? So think through that a little bit. And if you build it to a standard, you've taken this thing seriously, and you built using a cloud provider, so the odds are you're doing all the right things, right? Don't try to do it on your own, and then get some help if you need to. But always keep these takeaways in hand, so you can save yourself some battle scars, and then probably accelerate faster than I could.
That's really a powerful message, because I think this is true for all of us, right? We sort of don't, for those of us that live and breathe identity and access management, we all agree with you. The thing is, if you don't live and breathe identity and access management, and you do so much more, it's important to realize that this is critical. These takeaways are really important. You want to make it less important than it is, in terms of you want identity to just go away and take care of itself, then you've got to invest in some of this. You've got to recognize it's foundational. You've got to spend the time, design, and plan for growth. You've got to understand that security isn't here to go away. It's just only getting more and more focus. And in fact, most organizations, I believe, there are board meetings. There's a lot of discussion around what's the problem, what are the granular areas that of security. People are sort of coming up to speed. End users are getting far more sophisticated. This is another thing to remember. So people understand APIs. They understand what your vulnerable points are. And not everyone is coming in with a good purpose, right? So the sophistication is increasing what they call hackerism. And so you've got a far more sophisticated set of hackers coming at whatever solution you have. And it's important to understand that, because now your security is not just a nice to have. It's not a checkbox. It is something that is literally being used and exercised every day. I know Ashok said identity is hard. Yes, it is, because there are so many layers to it. There's the identity of the human. There's the identity of the service account. There's identity that is the IoT device. All of these have to somehow play together and give you a holistic security solution end to end. And as far as future proofing goes, everyone asks me, so is this a long-term solution? It's only as long-term as you know what's going to happen. There's always going to be unpredictable stuff coming at us. But the idea is deal with what you know is coming, make sure you can scale, and build in flexibility, because flexibility is what says, aha, my business drivers are changing, but I can still work with it, right? So that's what we wanted to, talk to you about today. Identity is foundational. Don't take shortcuts. Know that you have to invest in it. Security is critical. Don't look at it as something that you just checkbox. As Ashok said, build to a standard, because then that way change is easier. And Ashok, I know you talked about an identity provider. I'm assuming you talked about a standard IDaaS service, right? That you take advantage of. So that's important, because then the complexity is abstracted from the people that need to deliver a service, because they shouldn't have to think about this. They shouldn't have to know how identity works. They should just know that I can consume this service and it'll always give me these results, because that's really critical consistency, and finally, future-proofing. So those were the messages we wanted to talk about today and leave you with. And if you have, I know we are almost on time, so I'd like to say that this is your opportunity to think this through. I want to thank Ashok for taking the time to talk to us about his journey. And we want to really give you real life stories, not just, consultants coming up with, hey, this is a good idea, but more a case of think through, understand, and here are some real life examples and people that you can work with. I know we're running a little short on time, so if you could just mail us your questions or put it on our Pontis site, we'll make sure to get you answers. And until we talk again, thank you all for coming, and we do hope this has been a useful session. And thanks again, Ashok.
Thank you, Vinita. Thank you,
Take
Pontis.
care. Bye.